Greetings out there, and we're recording this on Monday, February 20th. We're rejoined once again by State Representative Tesha Buss. Hello, Tesha from Woodstock-Plymouth-Reading, and we are now a couple weeks since our last recording, and I'm filling in for Tom Ayers. I'm Patrick Cody from Okemo Valley TV, filling in for, as I said, Tom Ayers, senior staff writer from the Vermont Standard. And last that Tom spoke with you, Tesha, was before the town meeting break. And want to catch us up to speed on where things are and how you spent the town meeting day or the town meeting week break. What did you get up to, and how was that spent?
Well, thank you for having me on, Patrick. It's such a pleasure again. That week was not exactly a week off for me. On Saturday, Senator Clarkson and I went to both the Reading Town meeting, which was an informational meeting because they do all of their voting on Tuesday. And then we followed it by going to the Woodstock Town meeting, which does a split of some things that are voted on the floor and some things that go through the vote on Tuesday. And at both meetings, we stood up and presented what we've been talking about mostly in our committees. Allison is on two committees, being in the Senate. I just sit on House Education. And so she covered the more broad spectrum, and I covered more about education and property taxes, since obviously people are very passionate about the money that we spend in property taxes, and is it being spent well in our educational system? And that is, I've been in the job for 9 weeks, and one of those was our week that we had off. So I'm learning a lot about how to help our system, but it's a very, very intense job. It's huge. There's also we sit in the legislature and we only have so much control because most of the control is actually locally based. So we have to work in a very different spectrum than sometimes people think, like, oh, can you come and help me make this happen for our school? And I'm like, well, that's a local thing, and less of what we can legislate for everybody. But yeah, so we did those two meetings, and then I'm a part-time single mom. I say that because my daughter's father has her as well, but this has been a challenging year, and so I did take 2 days to be with my kid because she had Monday and Tuesday off, and then the rest of the week I actually had to work for my business because I had an employee that got hurt. So I did not have anywhere close to a week off. It was a week filled with work, but we went back in and we did our crossover, which meant that all of the policy bills had to have gone out of committee on Friday. So it was a very intense and passionate week about some conversations. So one thing that was voted out of our committee this week was a pause of the PCB program. And some people get real sparked by this. And so I'd like to take this opportunity real quickly just to explain PCBs real quick. It's a plastic that Monsanto mostly put into building materials. It is what sparked Burlington High School to be moved into a Macy's and for that renovation project to happen. Now, Burlington High School's levels were unbelievably higher than all the other schools that were built with these same products at about the same time. So it's really a confusing thing as to why those levels aren't consistent with all the other schools of the same vintage. But it's helpful to know a number of things. The indoor air quality, the EPA does not have a way to measure indoor air quality as it refers to PCBs. So we had to create that quality here in the state of Vermont. And when we did it, we had a very, very intense standard for that. Now that standard has been relaxed, but it is still exposure in a school for over 200 days per year for 9.5 hours per day for 30 years. So that standard is much higher than any student is ever going to go through, because they're also not going to be in the same building for anywhere longer than 7 years. So what we did in this bill was say, we're going to pause the program, task the task force that will deal with school construction to make sure that that level that we test at is actually the level it should be. And then figure out if our testing mandates an immediate action to rectify the problem, or if it can be folded into a more structured process for what we're already going to do renovation wise in every school, so that we don't redo an entire interior of a roof and 2 years later the construction plan says, well, I know you just did that for PCBs, but we're tearing the whole gymnasium down because of XYZ, so you just wasted $3 million. We would like to avoid that.
Mhm. And so this bill is one that got voted out of your committee last Friday?
It did. So it'll go to appropriations, because there is an appropriation for how much we already have to give the folks that are in process. So if your building has already been tested for PCBs, we're going to make sure that we take anything that has to be done to the end of the road. But we're pausing it so that no one else is in a position where, you know, they get tested and they need $5 million of work in their school, and they can't bond fast enough to get that money to do that work. And we as a state can't always be in a position where if every school, 300 and something schools, if every one is $5, $6, $7 million, we don't have the ability to bond for that either. So we really need to step back and look at, well, we may have the ability to bond for it, but not in a crisis position.
Mhm.
We really want to look at this more methodically.
Mhm. And I assume it went through a lot of, is what passed through your committee, how closely did it look to the bill as originally drafted?
The pause language in the program was all newly drafted. The rest of it was taking the Senate's bill, which is already in process to do school construction, and adding these nuances. So, and the person from Legislative Council that drafted this also drafted all of the bills surrounding the lead remediation in fixtures in all schools. So this one went very smoothly because everyone had so much experience in history, either with the PCBs or with other types of programs like it. So this was not incredibly complicated from that perspective, but it did take us a while to work out some of the details. What was really complicated it was an extremely emotional and charged philosophical argument, was the removal of some of the restrictions that independent schools can place on their admissions process. And the reason why the committee really wants to remove the admissions process, and this is for general education students, we're not all the kids that have disabilities and all the kids that are on IEPs, they already have a full process for how they get accepted or admitted into independent schools. But when you're a general ed person and you don't need any specialized services, you can still be asked for entrance exams and your educational history and your testing scores and whatnot. And the committee really believes that when you are on public dollars, that the admission process should be open, because in the Vermont Constitution, the only benefit is to be educated. And that is not qualified by anything. It doesn't say you have to pass entrance exams to be educated in Vermont. It just says by being a citizen, your right is to be educated. And so when public dollars go to a public school or to an independent school to educate you on behalf of the public, we believe that that constitutional right should follow you. And it shouldn't be conditioned by, well, at independent schools, it can be conditioned by an entrance exam. So that passed out of our committee with a 7-4-1 vote.
Mm-hmm.
So that one definitely had a lot of charge to it. And it'll be really interesting to see that path and how it moves forward. And hopefully I explained it in a way that made sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one that's been getting a lot of attention in the news. And I was going to ask about that bill, but that bill is separate from the PCB. They're
That's
not. Yeah,
correct.
yeah, yeah. So but both of them had a lot of. It sounds like emotional charge behind them. One is probably. It sounds like maybe uh, uh, the public financing for independent or private schools. That one seems like it has still a long way to go. Would that be a correct assessment?
Well, it was voted out of committee and it will go to the floor on Thursday because it does not have an appropriation attached to it. There's no money being spent.
So that's
From what
just a
I
policy
understand,
bill, but
yeah,
there's
it's
a
just
lot
a
of controversy around that one from, I think on both sides from what I've been just hearing about in the news. It sounds like that one will be getting a lot of I think that one will be getting heavily scrutinized.
very much so. We have a caucus that we have a ton of. So in the state of Vermont, we have about 84,000 children and 83,000 children and 4,000, a little bit more than 4,000 of those kids go to private or independent schools. So while it's relatively a small number, you're talking 4% ish of all of Vermont's children, they go to over 100 different independent schools in the state. So that is another thing that the committee is looking at for the future. A lot of times there are tuitioning towns that can send kids to a public school or an independent school. It is not solely talking about places where there's only an independent school option for the high school.
Mhm.
But when we're sending our money in so many different directions, it's concerning. What's the tipping point for a dual education system? So that is something that the committee will look at in next year.
Mhm.
But we'll plant the seeds and start gathering our information for that conversation now.
And so what is the main charge now for your education committee going forward after crossover?
We'll receive all of the Senate bills. One will be the school construction bill, which we already sort of wrapped into our PCB pausing. And then we'll actually get um, a look at the childcare bill and how that affects pre-K. And so that has been changing, down to the wire. So, it'll be really interesting to see what our committee does with that and whether or not what kind of changes that we want to make. And we have not done a single bit of investigative work in that. We've not heard testimony on it. So that'll be brand new to our committee to really dive in and receive that information.
Mhm. And locally, in terms of Woodstock High School, have you been involved any further with some of the discussions around the bullying and the gun threat issue, and that was creating a little bit of turmoil last month?
Uh, I've certainly not been too much of a part of it in the last 2 weeks because I haven't been around as much locally. But I did speak about to Sherry Sousa, the superintendent, a couple of weeks ago. And our kids that go to school there's a lot of social action groups and a lot of talking within the kids. And I said, the administration can do certain things and the school board can do certain things, but what is most important, I think, is that when the student leaders in the school can bring their attention to this. Because if it is, not cool to bully someone in any way and they can self-police, that is super important as well. Because if it's not tolerated amongst the kids, it's going to be the easiest and fastest way to shut that down. The hazement, harassment, and bullying is across the state.
Mhm.
And we need some really strong actions to be taken upon this. And I believe that that needs to happen from a safety perspective, from each school board level, and even from the Agency of Education. But I think the real change will happen on the ground.
Good news that came out of the school district is that at Woodstock High School, both the snowboard and girls hockey team won state championships. Girls
Yeah,
hockey was back to back, and so it's good to see some positive news come out of the school. It's something for everyone to celebrate.
that's right. Very, very needed positive.
Yeah. Um, and what's the week ahead looking like for you?
This is going to be a very long week.
Uh,
We might have floor discussions on each bill that could last for hours. So, we've been told to bring lots of snacks, even though we can't eat in the chamber. They'll give us breaks to step out and get the food that we need. But this will be the week that we won't walk off the floor until the bill is passed or until the bill is killed. That's it.
Do you have any secret ingredients for like your stamina that you'd care to share? Like, how do you actually get through a week like that?
Well, I am a person that has put myself in a number of situations that require really intense amounts of stamina for short amounts of time. My theater training, when you go into a technical week, you could absolutely look at 100 hours of being awake and in that theater. And, particularly as a director working with all the design teams and then actors and such. As a small business owner, I've been in that situation many times. You have an employee that doesn't show up and you're covering for them, and you're an employee as well, and you roll up your sleeves and you don't leave until the job gets done. It's a lot. But I feel that my life experience has prepared me as best as possible.
Mhm.
And yeah, you got to eat really good food and stay hydrated and stay focused. And this is where relationships really come into play. From what they've always said that to us from the beginning of being freshmen: relationship, relationship, relationship. And now I can text or call someone knowing the bills that are coming up this week. That's what today is all about, is us calling each other and saying, okay, talk to me about why your committee voted this bill out. I don't need to read and understand every detail of 87 pages. I need to know that you did your best work, and I'm going to stand behind you. And, and sometimes we say, this is not perfect, but it is better. And we got to go with better, because if we wait for perfect, we'll not make any change ever.
Mhm. I think that's a good. I think that's a good way to wrap up there.
Yes.
So, well, thank you for your time. I wish you luck and plenty of stamina for the week ahead. And I know Tom will be back, if not next week. I think I'm on again with you next week, and then Tom will,
So,
will pick it up the week after. So,
all right.
all right, I appreciate your time. And as always, thank you. And we'll talk to you again.
Thanks so much for having me on, Patrick. I appreciate it.